Hello and welcome to another episode of Climate Watch. I'm Zhou Fang. China is undergoing an unprecedented climate transformation. 5 years after announcing its dual carbon goals, the country is not just meeting but accelerating its ambitions. The 2025 annual report on China's climate actions details a sweeping green transition, from transportation to construction, and a strengthened grip on non-CO2 greenhouse gases. By the end of June, the total installed capacity of renewable energy in China accounted for over 40% of the global total. The country has already surpassed its 2030 nationally determined contributions targets ahead of schedule for wind and solar power capacity. The country is entering a new phase with the newly released 2035 nationally determined contributions. It's the first time China has set an absolute emissions reduction target, marking the country's shift from intensity-based control to total emissions control. It's estimated that by 2035, China's net greenhouse gas emissions will drop from the peak level by over 1 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. As the world turns its eyes to the upcoming COP30 in Brazil, China's journey offers a critical case study in scaling clean energy, innovating climate finance, and building a climate-resilient future. In this episode, I spoke with Wu Changhua, president of the Global Climate Academy and chair of the Governing Council of the Asia-Pacific Water Forum. We explore how a powerful governance model translates national pledges into action, how the national carbon market spanning several key industries operates, and why China has formally elevated climate adaptation to a strategic pillar alongside mitigation. Ms. Wu, thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're talking about China's achievements in its dual carbon goals. While official data shows that in 2024, China's carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP continued to decline compared to 2005. By the end of June of this year, the total installed capacity of renewable energy power generation in China surpassed 2.1 billion kilowatts, accounting for over 40% of the global total. And specifically, the installed capacity of wind and solar power have already met the 2030 NDC targets ahead of schedule. So what do you make of these achievements? What significance does the achievement hold?
Well, thank you for having me on the program again. Of course, as you have identified all those numbers, there's a very impressive list of quantitative targets, achievements so far. There's no doubt globally, China has been recognized as the leader in terms of clean energy transformation. Particularly now, actually, the global community is entering the Balam in Brazil, the COP30. I think the achievements, the experiences China has offered shall play a very significant role in terms of boosting the confidence through the COP process, and hopefully somehow there will be meaningful outcomes negotiated and agreed upon at the end of the COP30. So the question is more, I think many countries, many people have been asking this question and trying to find the answer to say how did China achieve the achievement so far. I think it is very, very obvious that China has seriously embraced the global climate governance mechanism and signed up to the Paris Agreement as a signatory country, and really started to translate global commitments into domestic laws, regulations, frameworks. So in overall sort of architecture, you see a system change, right? It's a system design. In particular, through this 1+N national strategy, literally putting the decarbonization agenda as the lead of the national strategic developments, and then started to, aligning the regional as well as its industrial sector sort of pathways along that system. So the strength of China's governance institutions definitely has made a very, very strong point that only by having very strong governance and institutions will be China, will be a country able actually to embed the global climate commitments like NDCs into their domestic, system, and really started to overhaul the economy, the industry, the infrastructure, the product, the services, you name it. And that's pretty much the case China has made so far.
Talking about NDCs, actually, China has already submitted 3 rounds of NDC targets. China has made significant progress, including the transition of clean energy from its role as a supplementary role to a mainstay in the country's energy mix. And then let's talk about the country's national carbon market. And actually, at the beginning of this year, the national carbon market expanded its coverage from the power sector to include more sectors such as steel, cement, and aluminum smelting. It has become the world's largest carbon market by covered emissions. Then how important do you think this expansion is for achieving the national emission reduction targets?
So China today, if you look at the carbon, we'll call it emission trading, market, it's been playing a few very important roles. One, it's a market-based instrument. It's helping really to discover the carbon pricing. As we all know, actually, in order to really achieve decarbonization, pricing of a carbon is a very, very critical factor. If you emit carbons, you have to pay for a fee. The national carbon market actually is playing that sort of role. So we have a very mainstreamed national policy scheme to play that kind of role. Secondly, we literally build up this sort of capacity. We also learned the institutional structure, right, and the system, literally, because in order to really roll out a successful or meaningful ETS, carbon emission trading system, you need to build up this sort of, you have laws, regulations, standards. You need to have the capability for, registration, MRVs, verification. So the whole system, basically. And so China has achieved that as well. And then look at the role it's been playing today. Basically, now China has both the compliance, ETS, basically not only covering the power sector, as you mentioned. China started this year expanding to 3 other, we call it hard to abate industrial sectors, steel, cement, and aluminum smeltering, because it's very difficult actually to find easy solutions to decarbonize those industrial sectors there. So carbon market actually is potentially having the role to play in that context there. So currently China has about 5 to 6 billion tons of annual emissions covered in the carbon market, national carbon market already, and covering about 60% of the total emissions there. Of course, we started to also witnessing the pricing, which is a little bit sort of stabilized so far. It's started to play its dual role there. Besides that, China has also rolled out this sort of voluntary market.
Yeah, Ms. Wu, let's talk about this. Yeah, let's talk about this in our next question. We are talking about the expansion of China's carbon market into more sectors. So how has this expansion changed the nature and influence of China's carbon market?
A few ways of looking at it. One, if you look at the scope coverage, that's definitely expanded. If you look at the power sector in the first few years, actually it covered about 40% of China's total emissions. Now it covers about 60%. That's a big sort of expansion of the scope there. And in the meantime, if you look at, when you set up a market mechanism, what do you expect? You expect there's a pricing, you expect volatility, you expect more activities, trading activities there. So now with the expanded coverage and the size of the carbon market there, you can expect actually not only sector by sector, but also cross-sector sort of activities, trading alignment there as well. So the activity, the volatility, will be definitely becoming more active there as well. But in the meantime, if you look at the numbers of companies covered, included in the carbon market system there, I think back in when we only had a power sector, we had about 2,200 companies covered. in the compliance sort of market trading. And now we have 1,500 more. So now we have about 3,700-ish sort of companies covered. So you have more market players actually getting into this market to play. And so, as I mentioned, the size of the market, the scale of the market, the number of participations expansion, as well as the total emissions covered there. So you can expect a more active, more meaningful market-based instrument actually coming together to support China's decarbonization process.
This expansion is really more influential. And then let's talk about China's voluntary emission reduction market. I've got some data. Well, as of October 28th, this national voluntary greenhouse gas emissions reduction trading market had successfully registered 31 projects and over 15 million tons of China certified emission reductions, and the cumulative trading volume has exceeded 3.2 million tons with a turnover of 270 million yuan. That's about 38 million US dollars. So what's your view on the development of China's voluntary emission reduction trading market?
Obviously, the numbers tell we're still at a very early stage. The size of the market is still limited. If we're limited by project numbers there, the size of the credits issued, as well as the trading part there as well. So it is becoming a very important part of the market-based instruments in China. Because in order to do so, we do, this sort of credits projects need to be built upon very solidly developed standards, definitions, stuff like that. Currently, if you look at those 31 projects already registered, they are pretty much in sectors like renewables, like forestry, carbon sinks, as well as the methane recovery. So the number, the project number sector actually is limited at this moment. In the meantime, China does also need to develop standardized, MRVs, registration, transparencies. In the meantime, expanding the methodology part as well. Currently, there are lots of efforts in terms of looking into blue carbon, soil carbon, CCUS, you name it. And you can literally look into the future that, the role of the CCERs will continue to expand, but it has to be developed actually aligned with the policy agenda and not just the sort of open market there at all. In the meantime, of course, the voluntary market needs to be well linked with the compliance ETS trading as well. So, you have to avoid, for instance, issues like double accounting and all others there. We need to build up, put in place well-established trading infrastructure, you name it. So basically, I think China is on this track to develop a well sort of established voluntary carbon market represented by CCRs.
As you mentioned, this voluntary carbon market is also important in terms of achieving China's carbon goals. And then what measures do you think can be taken to further develop this voluntary emission reduction trading market? As Chinese authorities have said that this trading market has entered a critical stage of development.
It is important. It's a voluntary market. And so when it's voluntary, it's not just everyone can do it. It has to be built upon solid regulation standards, frameworks, you name it. So I think that's where China is making more efforts in order to make sure the voluntary market is credible. The second dimension is interoperability. As I said, it's very sector specific, right? Now we have like renewables, forestry, carbon sink, methane natural recovery, and you literally need to build up the standard, system in order to get more projects actually into that process. On the third side, actually, I think there are definitely some positive developments in terms of expanded sort of sustainability matters there. Now we have biodiversity, conservation, global convention there as well. And China is also playing a very big, important role in terms of enhancing biodiversity protection, in terms of nature-based solutions there. So there are other areas of developments at this moment that started to play a role in terms of enhancing actually the methodologies development in terms of linking decarbonization with other ecological benefits like, as I mentioned, actually biodiversity, nature, agriculture, land use, you name it. So the prospect actually is very, very bright in the future. But as I said, I really want to emphasize for voluntary market to develop really healthily, sustainably, we do need to make sure we get, the legislative, policy, regulatory context, as well as actually the system management together. In the meantime, to develop more capability, expertise on the ground as well, not only project development, but also verification, assurance, auditing, you name it. It's a whole sector, literally. China is moving forward. So as I said, we're already getting into this landscape, moving forward with the sector development. But in the meantime, there are lots of learning to do. And in the meantime, a lot of capacity building to do as well.
And then let's talk about green finance. Well, the release of the Catalogue of Green Finance Supported Projects 2025 edition has unified the classification criteria for green credit and green bonds. What benefits will this generate in terms of reducing compliance costs for financial institutions and enhancing the liquidity of green assets?
I think this is a major step taken by Chinese government in terms of, on one side, we do need to, accelerating the development of China's domestic green finance market. But in the meantime, actually, to ensure the interoperability with the global standards, we do need to not only mobilize domestic financial resources, but also to attract and mobilize more international financial resources, providing the access to the international finance and to basically finance, invest in China's sustainability there as well. So that's a sort of the bigger context there. So the 2025 Green Finance Catalog is a symbolic in a way that, basically Chinese financial market decided to embrace with the global standards, with the global platforms there as well. Of course, if you look at, there are a few things actually, alignment already been happening with the EU side. So China EU has already had this China EU common ground taxonomy. So we are aligning, making the efforts actually aligning with the EU taxonomy to make sure, the standards, regulations, the rules actually applied will also, in EU, will also be applicable to China part as well, or the other way around, basically.
You mentioned the Common Ground taxonomy. Let's talk more about this. It's a report jointly developed by Chinese and European experts. Its full name is the Common Ground Taxonomy Climate Change Mitigation Report, and it's the world's first cross-border sustainable finance taxonomy. Then my question is, under what background was this taxonomy report formed and released? What is its significance?
The agenda is very, very clear. China has been stepping up its efforts to develop its green finance standard taxonomy there. And but when Chinese regulators been doing that, what they have in their mind is, of course, we need to address domestic priority issues there. But in the meantime, we had to make sure, we have this sort of alignment with other international practices standards there already. So EU definitely has been the pioneering part in terms of setting because they have this Green Deal and they build up this system actually together. So they have the Green Deal, set the strategic priority, and of course targets there as well. And along with it, actually, finance, the taxonomy is a very important part of the standardization landscape there, because what do you mean green, right? What do you mean sustainability? So all those definitions are defined clearly. And so, in order to do so, actually, you need to make sure, the standards, regulations actually put together, aligning actually all those endeavor with the targets, the goals set under the Green Deal. When China decided to put together this sort of taxonomy, green climate or finance taxonomy, it's pretty much sort of have EU as the example there already. So at the EU-China bilateral front, and key players like People's Bank of China and the EU commissions, actually, they've decided to come together so to do so. So that's probably should be heralded as a major success in terms of a role model, actually, in terms of how China, EU have been working together willingly and to build up this sort of commonality, interoperability to ensure, green finance flows. Not only in respective jurisdictions, but in the meantime, actually cross-border there as well. It is important in a way, for instance, China's efforts so far. We sort of learned in that process. We developed our own green bonds, built up a system actually in China. And so we started to have this first China's green bond endorsed project, the catalog that's pretty much aligned with the EU, their taxonomy there as well.
And then let's talk about another aspect, which is not about carbon dioxide. It's actually about non-CO2. While China is deepening carbon dioxide emission reduction, it's also expanding its control to cover other significant non-CO2 greenhouse gases. To this end, the country has specifically issued one action plan for methane emission control and NO, which is nitrous oxide emission control plans. So what do you make of the country issuing such action plans, specifically targeting non-CO2 greenhouse gases?
Sure. It's very, very important, actually. Let me just add a little bit of background. So this year, just in September, and during the UN General Assembly process, Chinese President Xi Jinping announced China's 2035 NDCs. In it, very specifically, stating China's commitment. So it's no longer just a carbon CO2 emissions, but rather all greenhouse gases emissions there. So they're all together 7, basic carbon emissions plus 6 others there already. So that's the commitment China has actually put into its Paris Agreement commitment leading up to 2035. So that's the general background there. So for China, I think about 17% of China's total emissions so far actually from non-CO2 sources there. So that's a sort of a given. So, 17% is a big number because China is the largest emitter today, of the overall greenhouse gases emissions there. So to address that 17% emissions is very significant for China to, fulfill its commitment to the Paris Agreement. But in the meantime, actually very important to deliver domestic agenda, transformation agenda there as well. So what to do? So as I mentioned, China has already rolled out 2, specific sort of non-CO2, greenhouse gases sort of action plans there. Yes, we set the targets. We're going to take tremendous efforts to address methane as well as nitrous oxide there. So then we do need to look into details in terms of what do we mean. What are we talking about, basically? So where are the intervention points to deliver, to address that? So for methane part emissions, and the target, the action plan is mostly addressing coal mining, agriculture, waste, and oil and gas. So those are the identified major sources of methane emissions there. So in that action plan, and so there are specific steps actually, set to address those. We need to detect, we need to recover, and basic capture and recover there as well. If you look at the nitrous oxide, actually, we are talking about mostly like a fertilizer optimization, like chemical processes and livestock management there. So there are specific actions addressing those issues now. And through those action plans, China basically are advancing its actions towards upgrading, for instance, detection and recovery technology, methane capturing and reuse. And you started to see more investment into like waste management, biogas, and chemical process optimizations there. So those are the greenhouse gases that are mostly short-lived, but somehow because they are, they have a much powerful greenhouse climate impact there. So we do need to address them. as quickly as possible. On one side, that's going to benefit, of course, climate mitigation. But in the meantime, actually, I think that also triggers more innovation and as well as a financial investment actually into those areas. And the companies, just imagining companies in providing solutions in those contexts are expected to really benefit from their contribution, innovation actually to addressing those issues and really capturing those action plans opportunities to become more successful commercially.
While mitigating carbon emissions is the fundamental solution, but don't forget the increasingly frequent extreme weather events and long-term climate risks have also become a reality we must face. This year, China has announced 2035 NDC's targets, and it has for the first time incorporated adaptation into its NDC targets. The new goal also includes seeking to basically build a climate resilient society by 2035, with significant improvements in the country's ability to adapt to climate change. So how would you evaluate China's efforts to promote and improve climate change adaptation?
Sure. In the global climate change governance mechanisms there were two things that always we call a twin agenda. On one side, we need to mitigate climate change. That's why we're talking about energy, revolution, clean energy transformation. But in the meantime, the other side actually is adaptation. And now, particularly with more intensified climate change disasters, crisis there, adaptation, resilience becomes so critical, meaning to make sure we have this early warning capability if some disaster happens there. But in the meantime, we have emergency response capability mechanism putting together. And of course, after disasters, sort of, rebuild, recovery there as well. As you said, and China's 2035 NDC for the first time officially enhancing this sort of dimension. So now, if you look at China's NDCs, it's pretty much we call a twin sort of engines to advance China's climate change agenda domestically as well as globally there. It's not from ground zero. China has been making tremendous efforts in terms of, adaptation resilience. If you look at what has been happening in China, China already has about 200-ish climate resilience pilot cities launched. So we need to learn, trying to figure out how to build up the resilience at the city level. We have already put in place a major water diversion and flood control projects, particularly along the Yangtze River Delta, river basin area, as well as the Yellow River Basin as well. If you look at the agriculture climate resilience programs, particularly addressing those, arid and high altitude regions in the northwest China as well as southwest China, we already started to deploy some sort of, for example, drought resistance crops, as well as other resilience measures there. So that's sort of China has been on this journey, and only, of course, this is the point of time when China officially submitted its sort of commitment to actions to the Paris Agreement on adaptation there.
Indeed, climate change adaptation is also very important because facing all these actual or expected climate change and their effects, human beings have to, better adjust our systems to better respond to all these climate change events. Then let
me add one dimension.
Okay,
I think
is
if you look at the last 5 years globally, and every year, the costs and damages from extreme weather events exceeding $100 billion. So the cost, the loss, and the damages are huge at this moment there. So adaptation resilience is not just a good thing to have. It's about, its impact not only on our health, people's health, but also, our economy, our infrastructure, and the overall, actually, social, economic, sort of the health there as well. It's about security, resilient security. So I just want to make sure it's not just something good to have, rather it's a fundamental piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, right. Very fundamental pillar of the climate action. Then let's talk about the next, which is also the last question. We know China is an important participant and contributor to global ecological civilization construction. How is China practically advancing South-South cooperation on climate change? And how do you view China's continuous efforts to deepen South-South cooperation on climate change?
I think China has made its own national strategy, really, enhancing this South-South climate cooperation. And there are mechanisms set up already. First, there is a South-South Climate Cooperation Fund specifically set up to facilitate that sort of cooperation. From a financial side, I think in the last 10 years or so, China has already provided more than $3 billion US in climate first aid, concessional loans through this platform. And if you look at what the money has been spent on, we funded more than 40 developing countries in areas of solar, wind, and biogas systems. That's mostly on the energy side, energy access, and climate mitigation side. And the second dimension is about capacity building. Jointly, China has trained about more than 2,000 officials and technicians from, developing countries. I think 2 years ago, China-Africa Renewable Energy Cooperation Center was officially launched in Nairobi as the major platform vehicle to advance China-Africa renewable energy cooperation. On one side, as I said, it's about energy access, clean energy access, but in the meantime, to create not only energy access, but also really creating more socioeconomic growth opportunities benefiting local economy and the local community. So there as well. And in the meantime, besides this officially so narrowly defined South-South cooperation, China has also been advancing the green as well as the climate, mitigation adaptation agenda through vehicles like Belt and Road Initiative. So the Green Belt and Road Initiative, of course, has been a major vehicle in terms of investing in infrastructure in other countries. And very importantly, in that context, if you look at the standards, rules, regulation standards embedded in those sort of financing vehicles, actually green sustainability, climate mitigation or resilience actually is well embedded in those sort of, financing decision-making process there as well. And of course, that's not specifically narrowly focused on just climate, but rather it's about infrastructure, it's about energy, sort of the overlap there as well. Besides that, I think China will continue to play its dual role in the multilateral climate governance process. And by the way, actually, besides climate change, China has also made its commitment to global biodiversity conservation through the Kunming-Montreal Protocol. That's another vehicle, actually, of mobilizing financing into, of course, nature-based solutions as well as biodiversity. But the numbers is limited. And so China needs to maybe demonstrate, to showcase how it's handling the situation, how it's contributing actually to the global climate finance, but very importantly, using occasions like COP30 and other vehicles to mobilize, advocate, and mobilize more financial resources to support other developing countries to fight climate change.
Indeed, China has been demonstrating firm determination to actively address climate change and also achieve its dual carbon goals. But I think achieving these targets requires not only very arduous efforts domestically, but also a favorable international environment and also international cooperation. Thank you, Ms. Wu.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
A big thank you to Ms. Wu Changhua, President of the Global Climate Academy and Chair of the Governing Council of the Asia-Pacific Water Forum. And thank you for listening to this episode of Climate Watch. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share it with someone who's also concerned about the future of our planet. Bye for now.